"Ma'am, step away from the counter immediately." The words cut through First National Bank's marble lobby like a blade through silk. FBI agent Marcus Stone's hand rested on his holster as he pointed an accusatory finger at the black woman in the simple gray pantsuit. "I know you didn't come here for legitimate business. If you love stories that show how dignity and intelligence triumph over prejudice and arrogance, subscribe to Federal Secrets. We share real stories every day that reveal how federal power protects justice when local systems fail. Hit that like button if this story moves you, and tell us in the comments what you think should happen to officers who abuse their authority. Let me tell you how one moment of racial profiling became a career-ending nightmare for an FBI agent who thought his badge made him untouchable. The woman stood perfectly still at the customer service counter, a worn leather briefcase clutched in her manicured hands. Around them, Saturday afternoon customers froze mid-transaction. Phones emerged from purses and pockets. A circle of witnesses formed, drawn by the electric tension crackling through the air. Have you ever been so underestimated that people couldn't see the power you held right in front of them? The digital clock above the teller windows glowed 2:47 p.m. 3 hours 13 minutes until branch closing. Agent Marcus Stone had been having a perfect Saturday until she walked in. What Stone didn't know was that this woman had been waiting 18 months for exactly this moment. 12 years with the Bureau had taught him to spot trouble, and everything about this situation screamed suspicious activity. The way she'd entered without acknowledging security, the careful way she'd approached the customer service counter, the expensive briefcase that didn't match her modest appearance. But what Stone couldn't see was the federal badge hidden in her jacket pocket, or the digital recorder that had been capturing every word since she'd entered the building. "Turn around and place your hands where I can see them," Stone barked, his voice carrying across the marble expanse. "This is FBI business." Dr. Amara Williams remained motionless, her dark eyes tracking Stone's movements with surgical precision. Deep in her briefcase, an encrypted federal communication device buzzed silently with urgent messages from FBI headquarters. Messages she couldn't answer while Stone's paranoid attention focused entirely on her movements. What Dr. Williams didn't reveal was that those messages were from Director Chen himself, confirming that Stone's pattern of discrimination was finally being documented with federal-grade evidence. 20 feet away, 17-year-old Zoe Martinez held her phone steady, live streaming to her 800 followers on TikTok. The viewer count climbed steadily, 412, 631, 907. What Zoe didn't realize was that she was about to document the biggest federal accountability scandal in decades. "This is crazy," she whispered into her phone. "FBI agent is literally profiling this woman at my bank." Comments flooded the screen faster than she could read them, but hidden among the digital chaos, federal monitors were already flagging the stream for priority review. Bank manager Patricia Chen watched from behind bulletproof glass, her 15 years of customer service experience telling her this situation was spiraling beyond anyone's control. She'd seen Agent Stone in the building before, usually investigating fraud cases, but never had she witnessed him conduct himself with such aggressive authority. What Patricia didn't know was that Stone had been under federal surveillance for 8 months, and every move he made was being documented by investigators who specialized in civil rights violations. "Ma'am," Stone continued, circling closer like a predator studying prey. "You have 30 seconds to explain what you're doing here before I place you under arrest for suspicious activity." The accusation rippled through the gathered crowd. Someone whispered federal arrest behind a trembling hand. Others pulled out phones to document what appeared to be a federal law enforcement operation unfolding in real time. But this wasn't what it appeared to be. What Stone was about to discover would not only end his career but trigger congressional investigations into federal law enforcement accountability. Dr. Williams' phone buzzed against her hip. The caller ID flashed briefly. "Director Chen, you are gent." She couldn't answer. Not with her hands visible and Agent Stone's paranoid attention focused entirely on her movements. Near the ATM machine, security guard David Rodriguez shifted uncomfortably. 8 years of bank security had shown him every type of customer, but something about the woman's calm confidence seemed familiar. The way she carried herself suggested authority rather than guilt. What Rodriguez couldn't place was where he'd seen that authority before, but what he was witnessing would soon make national headlines. "Officer Stone," Dr. Williams said quietly, reading his name tag with deliberate precision. "Badge number 7483. I believe there's been a misunderstanding about my purpose here." Stone's expression flickered with confusion. How did she know his badge number? In his paranoid mind, memorizing federal identification suggested surveillance, planning, criminal intent. But Dr. Williams knew his badge number because she'd been studying his personnel file for months, documenting every complaint, every violation, every moment of discriminatory behavior that had led to this confrontation. What Stone was about to learn was that his badge number was already flagged in federal databases for civil rights violations. "How do you know my badge number?" Stone demanded. "Are you conducting surveillance on federal agents?" The question revealed more about Stone's mindset than he realized. In his world, black women didn't casually read badge numbers unless they were criminals planning something. What Stone didn't understand was that his assumption revealed exactly the kind of bias that federal investigators had been documenting for months. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to open that briefcase," Stone demanded. Slowly, no sudden movements. Around the lobby, customers pressed closer. What had started as routine banking was becoming a federal incident. The energy shifted from curiosity to anticipation to something approaching dread. But the real dread was building in places Stone couldn't see. What Stone didn't know was that in FBI headquarters, monitors were tracking his every move in real time. Dr. Williams' second phone, hidden in her jacket pocket, vibrated with an encrypted message from FBI headquarters. The text was brief but urgent. "Agent Stone's conduct under investigation. Document everything. Backup en route." She couldn't read the message without revealing the phone's existence, but what Stone was about to discover was that this encounter was being monitored at the highest levels of federal law enforcement. "Sir," Dr. Williams said, her voice carrying the quiet authority she used in federal briefing rooms, "I'm going to reach into my briefcase to provide identification. You can observe my movements." "No," Stone's voice cracked with paranoia. "Step away from the briefcase. I'll examine its contents myself." The crowd murmured with growing discomfort. Even civilians understood that demanding to search someone's personal property without cause violated basic constitutional rights. But what the crowd didn't know was that Stone's violation of constitutional rights was exactly what federal investigators had been waiting to document. Behind the teller counter, Patricia Chen activated the silent alarm. Not for robbery, but for federal incident requiring immediate supervisory response. The bank's insurance required documentation of any law enforcement activity that might generate liability. What Patricia didn't realize was that her alarm would trigger a response involving the highest levels of federal law enforcement. Zoe's live stream exploded past 1,500 viewers. Comments streamed like digital wildfire. "Someone call the news. This agent is out of control. Save this woman," mixed with less supportive messages that revealed the racial tensions Stone's actions were exposing. What none of the viewers realized was that this stream was being monitored by federal analysts who specialized in civil rights violations. "Ma'am," Stone announced loudly enough for every witness to hear, "I'm placing you under federal custody for suspicious activity, failure to comply with lawful orders, and potential fraud investigation." The words hit the marble lobby like a demolition charge. Federal custody, the phrase carried weight that made even confident citizens step backward. But Stone had just made the biggest mistake of his federal career. What he was about to discover was that the woman he was threatening to arrest was the federal agent assigned to investigate his pattern of discriminatory behavior. Dr. Williams' phone buzzed again. This time the caller ID read FBI Deputy Director Morrison, PRIT1. The call she couldn't answer might have been the one that could save Agent Stone's career. What Stone didn't understand was that Deputy Director Morrison was calling to authorize the operation that would end Stone's federal employment. "Agent Stone," she said, her voice still controlled despite the public humiliation. "Before you take any irreversible actions, I strongly suggest you verify my identity through proper federal channels." "I don't take suggestions from suspects," Stone replied, producing handcuffs from his belt. But what Stone didn't know was that the woman he was about to arrest held his professional fate in her hands, and the federal investigation that was about to destroy his career had been 18 months in the making. The digital clock read 2:59 p.m. Agent Stone had exactly 4 minutes to avoid destroying his 12-year federal career. But as Dr. Williams reached toward her jacket pocket, it became clear that time had already run out. What Stone was about to see would transform this confrontation from embarrassing mistake to career-ending federal incident. And this isn't even the strongest part. This is just getting started, because what Agent Stone was about to discover would not only end his career, but expose a network of federal discrimination that reached the highest levels of law enforcement. The handcuffs gleamed in the afternoon sunlight streaming through First National's floor-to-ceiling windows. Agent Stone moved with practiced authority, his 12 years of federal experience evident in every calculated step toward Dr. Williams. But what Stone couldn't see was the federal tactical team already positioned 3 blocks away, waiting for the signal that would end his career in spectacular fashion. "Final warning," he announced to the growing crowd, "interfere with federal law enforcement and you'll be arrested," as accessories. The threat sent ripples through the marble lobby. Customers who'd been recording on their phones hesitated, understanding that federal charges carried consequences no local attorney could easily dismiss. What they didn't understand was that the real federal authority in the room wasn't the one making threats. Only Zoe continued streaming, her teenage confidence immune to Stone's intimidation tactics. Her viewer count exploded past 2,500 as the hashtag #FBI profiles began trending locally. But hidden in those 2,500 viewers were federal monitors who were documenting every second of Stone's constitutional violations. Dr. Williams stood perfectly still, her badge wallet halfway out of her jacket pocket. "Agent Stone, I'm going to show you federal identification. Please step back and observe." "Show me nothing," Stone snarled. "Turn around and assume the position." His paranoia had escalated beyond reach. In his mind, every movement was suspicious, every word a potential deception. 12 years of investigating financial crimes had warped his perception until he saw criminality in ordinary banking activities. What Stone didn't realize was that his paranoia was being documented by investigators who specialized in recognizing patterns of discriminatory behavior. The badge wallet emerged fully from Dr. Williams' pocket. Worn black leather with government-issue quality that suggested years of professional use. Stone's eyes locked onto it with predatory focus. But what Stone couldn't see was the federal seal that would destroy his assumptions about power and authority. "Federal identification," Dr. Williams said clearly, her voice carrying to every witness in the lobby. "Special Agent in Charge Amara Williams, FBI Criminal Investigation Division." The words detonated like a bomb in the marble space. Special Agent in Charge. The title hit Stone like a physical blow, but his pride wouldn't allow comprehension. What Stone didn't understand was that Special Agent in Charge meant this woman outranked everyone in his field office, including his supervisor. "Anyone can buy fake badges online," he said, though his voice wavered slightly. "I've seen this scam before, Doctor." Williams opened the badge wallet with practiced precision. Inside, a gold FBI shield caught the afternoon light alongside official identification bearing her photograph, signature, and federal seal. But what Stone couldn't process was that the badge was real, the authority was genuine, and his career was about to implode. The documentation was unmistakably authentic, but Stone's prejudice created a psychological barrier that prevented him from accepting what his eyes were showing him. Zoe's live stream exploded past 3,500 viewers. Comments flooded faster than human eyes could track. "She's FBI agent about to get destroyed. Career over," mixed with shocked face emojis and fire symbols. What the viewers didn't know was that they were witnessing not just individual accountability, but the culmination of an 18-month federal investigation. Behind the teller counter, Patricia Chen had gone white. 15 years of banking experience had taught her to recognize federal identification, and what she was witnessing violated every protocol she'd ever learned about interagency cooperation. But what Patricia didn't know was that this violation of protocol was exactly what federal investigators had been documenting for months. Badge number 8217, Dr. Williams announced. Special Agent in Charge, Criminal Investigation Division, assigned to investigate federal civil rights violations in law enforcement. The last phrase landed like artillery fire. Civil rights violations in law enforcement. Stone's face drained of color as he realized the scope of his mistake. But what Stone still didn't understand was that he wasn't just making a mistake. He was providing the final evidence needed for federal prosecution. He wasn't just profiling a random citizen. He was conducting illegal surveillance on a federal agent specifically assigned to investigate officers like him. Dr. Williams produced a second piece of identification from her badge wallet. FBI headquarters access card with biometric encoding and security clearance notation. Level 7. Counterintelligence authorized. What Stone didn't know was that Level 7 clearance was rare even within the FBI, and his own Level 4 clearance meant this woman outranked him by 3 full levels within the federal hierarchy. Furthermore, Dr. Williams continued, her voice gaining strength, "I'm conducting an official investigation into discriminatory practices by federal agents under Title 42 U.S.C. Section 1983. Stone's legs nearly buckled. Section 1983 governed civil rights violations by law enforcement officers. The penalties included criminal prosecution, federal imprisonment, and lifetime ban from police work. But what Stone didn't realize was that his conduct over the past 22 minutes had provided substantial evidence for federal prosecutors who specialized in civil rights cases. Around the lobby, witnesses pressed closer. What had begun as routine banking drama was becoming a federal incident with career-destroying implications. But what the witnesses couldn't see was the federal response team that was already mobilizing to contain the fallout from Stone's discriminatory behavior. "Agent Stone," Dr. Williams said, consulting her watch with deliberate precision. "According to federal protocol, you have approximately 90 seconds to request supervisory intervention before this incident requires mandatory reporting to Internal Affairs." 90 seconds. The countdown created immediate pressure that made Stone's hands shake. What Stone didn't know was that Internal Affairs investigations could take months, involve polygraph examinations, and destroy reputations even when charges weren't filed. IA investigations were career killers, and Stone was 90 seconds away from triggering the process that would end his federal employment. His radio crackled with routine chatter from other agents conducting Saturday operations across the city. Normal federal business, while his career imploded in a bank lobby. But what Stone couldn't hear were the encrypted communications already flowing between FBI headquarters and field supervisors about his conduct. Stone grabbed the radio with trembling fingers. "Control, this is Agent Stone. I need immediate supervisory response at First National Bank, Commerce Street. Urgent." The dispatcher's voice was calm, professional. "Nature of emergency. Agent Stone." Stone looked at Dr. Williams, at the 3,500 people watching via live stream, at the bank employees documenting everything through security cameras. What Stone didn't know was that his radio call was being monitored by federal officials who were already preparing damage control strategies. How could he explain that he'd just threatened to arrest his own superior officer? Potential federal incident requiring senior agent consultation, he managed. "Roger, Supervisory Agent Martinez en route. ETA 12 minutes. 12 minutes felt like 12 hours. Dr. Williams returned her badge wallet to her jacket pocket with unhurried precision. But what Stone didn't understand was that those 12 minutes would be the longest of his federal career. Her movement suggested complete confidence in the eventual outcome, the kind of certainty that came from holding all the cards in a game where the stakes were measured in careers and federal prosecutions. "Agent Stone," she said, her voice carrying the authority he'd failed to recognize earlier. "While we wait for supervision, Perhaps you could explain the probable cause that justified threatening federal arrest of a fellow agent. The question was devastating in its simplicity. Stone had no probable cause, no evidence of criminal activity. What Stone couldn't admit was that his only justification was racial profiling that was about to end his federal career. No justification beyond the prejudice that federal investigators had been documenting for 18 months. "I thought," he began, then stopped. Every explanation made him sound more prejudiced, more incompetent, more deserving of termination. Zoe's live stream hit 4,500 viewers. The hashtag #FBI profiles was trending nationally as clips spread across multiple platforms. But what none of the viewers realized was that they were watching federal accountability happen in real time. News outlets were picking up the feed, recognizing a story with national implications that would dominate headlines for weeks. Dr. Williams produced a small digital recorder from her briefcase. "Agent Stone, I should inform you that this encounter has been documented for federal investigation purposes." The recorder had been running throughout their confrontation. Stone's threats, his refusal to examine proper identification, his escalation to federal arrest, everything was captured with courtroom-quality audio. But what Stone didn't know was that the recording was just one piece of evidence in a comprehensive federal case that had been building for months. "Constitutional violation," Stone's voice cracked. "Fourth Amendment protection against unreasonable search and seizure," Dr. Williams replied with professorial precision. 14th Amendment equal protection under law. Civil Rights Act Title 42 U.S.C. Section 1983. She enumerated each violation like a prosecutor reading charges. Stone realized he wasn't just facing employment consequences. What Stone was beginning to understand was that federal civil rights violations carried criminal penalties, including imprisonment. Federal civil rights violations carried criminal penalties, and Stone had just provided documented evidence of systematic discrimination. Through the bank's front windows, a black SUV with federal license plates pulled into the parking lot. Supervisory Agent Martinez had arrived 11 minutes early, suggesting the urgency of Stone's radio call had triggered immediate response. But what Stone didn't know was that Martinez had been expecting this call for months. "Agent Stone," Dr. Williams said, checking her watch again, "your supervisor is arriving. I recommend you consider very carefully how you're going to explain the last 24 minutes." Stone watched through the windows as Agent Martinez emerged from the SUV. 15 years of federal experience, impeccable reputation, the kind of supervisor who demanded accountability from his agents. What Stone couldn't see was Martinez's expression, which was already grim as he approached the bank entrance. The lobby fell silent except for the whispered commentary from Zoe's live stream. 4,500 viewers watched a federal supervisor enter what appeared to be a crime scene involving one of his own agents. Williams remained perfectly calm, her briefcase closed, her badge wallet secure, her digital recorder documenting every moment of Stone's professional destruction. But what Stone was about to discover was that Dr. Williams' investigation extended far beyond his individual conduct. She'd given him multiple opportunities to de-escalate, to examine proper identification, to recognize his error and withdraw gracefully. Instead, Stone had chosen escalation, paranoia, and racial profiling that was about to be reviewed by federal investigators trained to recognize patterns of discriminatory behavior. The bank's front door chimed as Agent Martinez entered. His eyes swept the lobby, taking in the crowd of witnesses, the phones recording everything, and his subordinate agent standing over a professionally dressed woman with obvious authority. What Martinez was about to learn would shock even his 15 years of federal experience. And believe me, this is only the beginning, because what Agent Martinez was about to discover would expose a pattern of discrimination that reached the highest levels of federal law enforcement. "Agent Stone," Martinez called across the marble space, his voice carrying 15 years of supervisory experience. "Report." Stone's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. How could he explain that the suspect was actually a superior officer investigating civil rights violations? How could he justify threatening arrest without probable cause? But what Stone didn't know was that Martinez already understood the full scope of this disaster. Dr. Williams stepped forward with quiet dignity. "Supervisory Agent Martinez, I'm Special Agent in Charge Amara Williams, Criminal Investigation Division. We need to discuss your agent's conduct immediately." Martinez's face went white as he recognized both the rank and the implication. Special Agent in Charge outranked everyone in his field office. What Martinez was beginning to realize was that if Zach Williams was conducting an investigation, it came from FBI headquarters with director-level authority. "Ma'am," Martinez said, approaching with the careful respect reserved for superior officers, "I wasn't aware of any scheduled operations in this sector." "Unscheduled assessment," Dr. Williams replied, her voice carrying the quiet power that commanded briefing rooms at federal headquarters. "Agent Stone has provided valuable data for our ongoing investigation into discriminatory practices within federal law enforcement." The phrase "ongoing investigation" hit the lobby like a thunderclap. This wasn't an isolated incident. What Stone was beginning to understand was that his behavior was part of a systematic review that could destroy multiple careers across the federal hierarchy. Stone's radio crackled with dispatch chatter, but the normal sounds of federal operations seemed distant now, irrelevant compared to the career-ending drama unfolding in marble and crystal. But what Stone couldn't hear were the encrypted communications flowing between FBI headquarters and senior officials about his conduct. "Sir," Stone said desperately, "there's been a misunderstanding. I was conducting routine security assessment when—" "Agent Stone, Dr. Williams interrupted gently. "Would you like to revise that statement? You threatened federal arrest, demanded search of personal property, and refused to examine proper identification. Those weren't routine security procedures, and everyone in the lobby knew it." Martinez pulled out his phone, frantically scrolling through federal directories to verify SAC Williams' credentials. What he found made his blood run cold. What Martinez discovered was that Dr. Amara Williams was assigned directly to FBI Director Chen's Office for Special Investigations into Civil Rights Violations. Director Chen's office. The phrase carried implications that extended beyond normal field operations. When the FBI director personally assigned investigators, it meant problems had reached the highest levels of federal attention. Zoe's live stream had exploded past 5,500 viewers as clips spread across social media platforms. #FBI fails was trending nationally alongside #civil rights and #federal accountability. But what none of the viewers realized was that they were watching the climax of an 18-month federal investigation. News organizations were scrambling to send crews to First National Bank, recognizing that this story would dominate headlines for weeks. Agent Martinez, Dr. Williams continued, opening her briefcase with practiced precision. "I think you should understand the scope of what your agent has just provided for our investigation." She withdrew a thick manila folder marked "Confidential, Federal Investigation." The cover bore the FBI seal and director-level authorization stamps that made Martinez's hands tremble slightly. What Martinez was seeing was documentation that could destroy careers and trigger congressional investigations. For the past 18 months, Dr. Williams announced, the Civil Rights Division has been investigating a pattern of discriminatory behavior by federal agents in this region. 18 months. Martinez realized this wasn't a random encounter. What Martinez was beginning to understand was that Zach Williams had been conducting systematic surveillance of his field office, building a case that could destroy careers and trigger congressional investigations. Agent Stone's conduct today represents the culmination of documented evidence we've been gathering. Dr. Williams continued, reading from the folder. Stone's personnel file was being dissected in front of witnesses who were broadcasting every detail to thousands of viewers. Agent Stone's personnel file shows concerning patterns. Dr. Williams read aloud. 17 excessive force complaints over 8 years. Disproportionate arrest rates for minority suspects. Each statistic landed like a physical blow. Stone's career was being systematically destroyed with facts he couldn't deny. What Stone was learning was that federal investigators had been connecting dots he thought were separate, unrelated incidents. 6 civil rights violation allegations investigated but dismissed due to insufficient evidence. Dr. Williams continued. Around the glass walls, employees pressed closer. Phones recorded everything, broadcasting to audiences that were sharing feeds across every platform. But what the witnesses didn't understand was that they were documenting federal accountability that would reshape law enforcement training nationwide. Furthermore, Dr. Williams said, turning to a specific page in the file, Agent Stone was specifically flagged for enhanced monitoring after the Rodriguez incident last year. The Rodriguez incident, Martinez remembered it vividly. Angel Rodriguez, a young Latino college student, had been detained for 6 hours on suspicion of drug trafficking. What Martinez was beginning to remember was that the charges were dropped when video evidence proved Stone had profiled Rodriguez based solely on ethnicity. The incident had generated negative publicity and internal warnings about discriminatory behavior, but Martinez had assumed it was resolved. What Martinez didn't know was that federal investigators were using the Rodriguez case as the foundation for a comprehensive investigation into Stone's pattern of discrimination. Williams read, with the Jenkins case in March, the Washington detention in June, and the Thompson investigation in September, 4 documented incidents of racial profiling within 12 months. Stone's face went ashen as his hidden history was exposed. What Stone was discovering was that every incident he thought had been forgotten was actually being investigated by federal civil rights specialists. He'd thought the incidents were separate, unconnected problems that had been resolved quietly through administrative channels. But what Stone was learning was that federal investigators had been connecting the dots, building a case that revealed systematic discrimination spanning his entire career. Patricia Chen, watching from behind bulletproof glass, remembered the Thompson incident. An elderly black man questioned for 20 minutes about suspicious financial activity that turned out to be a legitimate pension deposit. What Patricia was realizing was that every complaint had been documented, every incident investigated, and the FBI's Civil Rights Division had been building a comprehensive case. The man had filed a complaint, but Chen assumed it had been dismissed through normal administrative channels. Agent Martinez, Dr. Williams said, closing the folder with finality. Your agent's conduct today represents the final evidence needed to recommend federal prosecution under Title 18 U.S.C. Section 242. Section 242, Criminal Civil Rights Violations. Martinez knew the statute carried penalties of up to 10 years imprisonment for law enforcement officers who violated constitutional rights under color of authority. What Martinez was understanding was that Stone wasn't just facing employment termination, he was facing federal prosecution, imprisonment, and lifetime prohibition from law enforcement careers. Stone grabbed Martinez's arm desperately. Sir, she's making this sound worse than it is. I was just doing my job, following protocols. Agent Stone, Dr. Williams interrupted. Your protocols included threatening federal arrest of a superior officer without probable cause. That wasn't law enforcement. That was criminal behavior under federal statute. What Stone was beginning to comprehend was that his protocols were actually systematic violations of constitutional rights that federal investigators had been documenting for months. The accusation hung in the air like toxic gas. Criminal behavior. Stone wasn't just facing employment termination. Zoe's live stream comments exploded with reactions as viewers realized they were witnessing not just workplace discrimination, but federal criminal activity being exposed in real time. But what the viewers didn't understand was that this was just the beginning of revelations that would shock the federal law enforcement community. News outlets were linking to the feed, amplifying the audience exponentially as the story gained national attention. The investigation extends beyond individual agents, Dr. Williams continued, her voice carrying implications that made Martinez step backward. We're examining supervisory failures, training deficiencies, and institutional cultures that enable discriminatory behavior. Supervisory failures. Martinez realized his own career was now under scrutiny. What Martinez was discovering was that every decision to dismiss complaints, every failure to discipline problematic agents, every moment he'd chosen administrative convenience over civil rights enforcement was being evaluated by federal investigators. "Man," Martinez said, his voice barely steady, "what resolution are you seeking?" Dr. Williams smiled for the first time since the confrontation began. The expression wasn't comforting. What that smile suggested was someone who held all the cards and was prepared to play them strategically. It suggested someone who'd been planning this moment for months, waiting for Stone to provide the final evidence needed for federal prosecution. "Agent Martinez, resolution requires accountability. Agent Stone will face federal charges for civil rights violations. You'll face administrative review for supervisory negligence. This field office will undergo complete restructuring, under Director Chen's personal oversight." The scope of consequences was staggering. Federal charges, administrative reviews, director-level intervention. What had begun as Stone's individual misconduct was becoming a systemic crisis affecting the entire field office. Dr. Williams' phone buzzed with an encrypted message from FBI headquarters. She glanced at the screen, her expression shifting slightly. The message was brief but significant. "Media response team en route. Prepare for press conference authorization." What Stone didn't know was that the FBI was preparing to make his conduct a public example of federal accountability. Press conference authorization meant Stone's discriminatory behavior would become a national case study in civil rights enforcement. His actions would be analyzed in congressional hearings, law enforcement training programs, and federal accountability seminars. But Dr. Williams had one more revelation that would transform this from individual accountability to institutional reform. What Agent Stone was about to learn was that the investigation that began with Angel Rodriguez had uncovered connections reaching to the highest levels of federal law enforcement. Stone's behavior was just the tip of an iceberg that would sink careers across multiple agencies. Nothing has prepared you for what you're about to see, because what Dr. Williams was about to reveal would expose corruption that reached the highest levels of federal law enforcement. "Agent Stone," Dr. Williams said, returning her phone to her pocket, "you have approximately 6 minutes before media arrives. I recommend you use that time to consider whether you want to cooperate with federal investigators or face maximum prosecution." The sound of approaching sirens cut through the marble lobby like warning bells tolling for Stone's federal career. Through First National's floor-to-ceiling windows, multiple news vans rounded the corner onto Commerce Street. What Stone was seeing was his career ending in real time, broadcast to audiences that would make his discrimination a national symbol. Their satellite dishes extended like metal flowers reaching toward a story that would dominate headlines for weeks. 6 minutes. The countdown created immediate pressure that made Stone's decision urgent. What Stone didn't understand was that cooperation might result in reduced charges, while resistance could trigger the full weight of federal prosecution. "This is entrapment," he said desperately. "You deliberately provoked this confrontation to manufacture evidence." "Agent Stone," Dr. Williams replied with devastating calm, "entrapment requires inducement to commit crimes. I simply entered a bank while black and waited to see how you'd respond. Your reaction revealed character, not coercion." What Stone was learning was that his behavior reflected 18 months of documented patterns, not isolated mistakes that could be explained away. The legal precision of her answer demonstrated expertise that extended far beyond field operations. Stone was arguing constitutional law with someone who'd spent years prosecuting civil rights cases at the federal level. Zoe's live stream had reached 7,800 viewers, the hashtag #FBI profiles trending nationally as clips spread across every social media platform. But what the viewers didn't know was that they were watching the final moments of a federal investigation that would reshape law enforcement accountability. Comments flooded faster than human comprehension. "This agent is done, federal accountability. Live. Career destroyed in real time." Agent Martinez tried frantically to contain the damage. Sack Williams, perhaps we could discuss this matter through proper administrative channels. Agent Stone has an exemplary service record. What Martinez was attempting was damage control that federal investigators had anticipated and prepared for. Exemplary? Dr. Williams opened her manila folder again. 17 excessive force complaints. 6 civil rights violations, 4 documented incidents of racial profiling in 12 months. Agent Martinez. Your definition of exemplary service reveals why this investigation became necessary. What Martinez was discovering was that his administrative blindness to discriminatory behavior was exactly what federal investigators had been documenting. Each statistic was a nail in Stone's career coffin. But Martinez's denial suggested the supervisory failures extended beyond individual oversight to institutional blindness. Through the bank's front windows, Channel 7's news van pulled into the parking lot. Reporter Jessica Park emerged with her camera crew, drawn by social media alerts about a federal incident involving civil rights violations. What Stone was watching was his humiliation being prepared for broadcast to audiences across the nation. The story was escalating beyond law enforcement circles into public accountability that would define his legacy. Agent Stone, Dr. Williams continued, I'm going to give you one final opportunity to cooperate with federal investigators. Acknowledge your pattern of discriminatory behavior, agree to testimony before congressional oversight committees, and accept criminal prosecution in exchange for reduced sentencing. What Stone was being offered was his only path to avoiding maximum federal penalties. Congressional oversight committees meant Stone's misconduct was about to become political theater, with representatives from both parties demanding accountability from federal law enforcement. But what Stone didn't understand was that his name would be attached to legislation, reform initiatives, and campaign promises about police accountability. I need to call my attorney, Stone said, his voice barely audible above the growing chaos outside. Absolutely, you're right, Doctor. Williams agreed. However, your attorney will inform you that cooperation reduces federal sentences significantly. Title 18 U.S.C. Section 242 carries up to 10 years imprisonment, but cooperation agreements can result in probation and community service. What Stone was learning was that federal prosecutors offered significant incentives for cooperation in civil rights cases. 10 years imprisonment. The phrase hit Stone like a physical blow. He'd entered the bank thinking he was investigating suspicious activity. Now he faced the possibility of federal prison for civil rights violations. Martinez's phone buzzed with an urgent call from FBI headquarters. The caller ID showed Assistant Director Morrison, immediate response required. What Martinez was seeing was evidence that the investigation had reached the Assistant Director level, meaning damage control was no longer possible. Agent Martinez, the voice crackled through the phone loud enough for witnesses to hear. What the hell is happening in your field office? We have congressional staffers calling about federal agents on social media. Congressional staffers. The story had reached Capitol Hill in real time, triggering immediate political interest in federal law enforcement accountability. What Stone was learning was that his behavior was becoming a national symbol of institutional problems that required congressional intervention. Stone's actions were generating political pressure that would result in legislation, oversight hearings, and federal accountability measures. Sir, Martinez replied desperately. We have an isolated incident involving Agent Stone and Sack Williams. I'm implementing damage control protocols. Damage control? Assistant Director Morrison's voice carried 15 years of bureaucratic fury. What Morrison was expressing was the understanding that some incidents couldn't be contained through normal administrative channels. Agent Martinez, you have a special agent in charge conducting live investigations while your subordinate creates federal incidents on social media. This is career-ending negligence. What Martinez was hearing was confirmation that his supervisory failures were under career-ending negligence. Martinez realized his supervisory failures were under federal scrutiny that could destroy his pension, his reputation, and his future employment prospects in law enforcement. Williams activated her digital recorder again, ensuring every word of the conversation was documented for federal proceedings. Agent Martinez, Assistant Director Morrison, this is S.C. Williams. The situation requires immediate federal intervention and complete field office restructuring. Morrison's voice shifted to respectful recognition. C. Williams, ma'am, we weren't informed of your operation. What Morrison was acknowledging was that director-level investigations operated beyond normal field office knowledge, indicating the severity of the problems being investigated. Unscheduled assessment, sir. Agent Stone's conduct has provided compelling evidence for our civil rights investigation. I'm requesting immediate authorization for federal charges and media response. Media response authorization meant FBI headquarters was prepared to make Stone's case a public example of federal accountability. What Stone was learning was that his discriminatory behavior would become textbook material for civil rights training programs nationwide. Outside, 3 more news vans arrived. Local stations were being joined by national outlets as the story gained momentum across social media platforms. But what Stone couldn't see was that CNN, MSNBC, and Fox News were all preparing live coverage of his federal accountability. The hashtag #FBI profiles was trending alongside #federal accountability and #civil rights, generating millions of impressions as the story spread across digital platforms. Agent Stone, Dr. Williams said, ending the call with headquarters, media crews are assembling. You have approximately 3 minutes to decide whether you want to cooperate quietly or face maximum prosecution publicly. 3 minutes. The countdown created immediate pressure that made Stone's hands shake. What Stone was seeing through the windows was reporters setting up cameras, producers coordinating live shots, photographers adjusting lenses for optimal courtroom evidence quality. His humiliation was about to be broadcast to audiences that would make his discrimination a permanent part of federal accountability history. What exactly are you asking me to do? Stone asked, desperation cracking his voice. Acknowledge systematic discrimination. Testify about training failures that enabled civil rights violations. Cooperate with federal prosecutors investigating institutional patterns of racial profiling. Accept responsibility and help reform the system you've damaged. What Dr. Williams was offering was Stone's only path to redemption through accountability, rather than destruction through maximum prosecution. Each requirement was reasonable, necessary, and utterly humiliating for someone who'd built his identity around federal authority. But what Stone was beginning to understand was that cooperation could transform his disgrace into educational value for future law enforcement officers. Stone would have to publicly admit that his badge had been used for discrimination rather than justice, but that admission could prevent other officers from making similar mistakes. Zoe's live stream hit 9,200 viewers as news outlets began linking to her feed. The teenage girl who'd started recording random bank drama was now documenting federal accountability in real time. What Zoe didn't know was that her footage would be used in congressional hearings, civil rights seminars, and FBI training programs for years to come. Her documentation was creating a permanent record of how individual courage could expose systematic injustice. Agent Martinez, Dr. Williams said, turning her attention to the supervisor whose career was also ending. Your administrative review will examine every complaint dismissed, every incident ignored, every moment you chose institutional loyalty over civil rights enforcement. Martinez's 15 years of federal service were being reduced to a pattern of supervisory negligence that had enabled discriminatory behavior. What Martinez was realizing was that his reputation, his pension, his post-retirement consulting opportunities, everything was under federal scrutiny that could destroy his financial future. Patricia Chen watched from behind bulletproof glass as federal careers imploded in her bank lobby. 15 years of customer service had shown her many conflicts, but never had she witnessed systematic federal accountability playing out in real time. What Patricia was understanding was that this moment would be analyzed in business schools, law enforcement academies, and civil rights organizations, as an example of how institutional discrimination could be exposed and defeated. 2 minutes, Dr. Williams announced, checking her watch as news crews completed their setup outside. Agent Stone, Your decision determines whether you face this as a cooperating witness or a defiant criminal. What Stone was learning was that federal prosecutors distinguished between defendants who accepted responsibility and those who fought accountability, with dramatically different sentencing outcomes. Stone looked around the marble lobby at the witnesses recording everything, at the supervisor whose career was also ending, at the SSA who held his professional fate in her hands. But what Stone was really seeing was 18 months of investigation that had led to this moment of choice between cooperation and destruction. 18 months of systematic documentation had created an ironclad case that made resistance futile and cooperation his only rational option. "I'll cooperate," he whispered, the words barely audible but carrying the weight of complete surrender. Dr. Williams nodded with professional satisfaction. The investigation that began with Angel Rodriguez was about to achieve federal prosecution, congressional attention, and institutional reform that would protect civil rights for years to come. But what Stone didn't know was that Dr. Williams had one final revelation that would complete his understanding of how thoroughly his career had been destroyed. The real revelation was still coming. What Agent Stone was about to learn was that Dr. Williams' investigation extended beyond individual misconduct to reveal corruption reaching the highest levels of federal law enforcement. What Stone was about to discover was that his cooperation would help expose a network of discrimination that would shock the entire justice system and trigger the most comprehensive law enforcement reforms since the Civil Rights Act. And believe me, this changes the entire story, because what Dr. Williams was about to reveal would transform Stone from individual criminal to key witness in the biggest federal accountability scandal in decades. 1 minute before the news crews went live, Dr. Williams produced a final document from her briefcase. The paper rustled in the marble silence like autumn leaves in a graveyard. FBI letterhead gleamed under crystal chandeliers as she unfolded what appeared to be Agent Stone's professional death warrant. But what Stone was about to discover was that this document would transform him from criminal defendant to federal witness in the most important civil rights case in decades. "Agent Stone," she said, her voice carrying the authority that had commanded federal briefing rooms for 8 years, "this is a pre-written cooperation agreement. Your signature acknowledges systematic discrimination, commits you to congressional testimony, and accepts federal prosecution in exchange for reduced sentencing." The document represented Stone's only path to avoiding maximum punishment. Sign it, and face public humiliation but possible probation. Refuse, and face 10 years in federal prison for civil rights violations. What Stone was reading were terms that would make him a permanent symbol of federal accountability, but also give him a chance at redemption through education. Stone's hands trembled as he read the terms. Complete admission of guilt, testimony before House and Senate oversight committees, cooperation with ongoing investigations into institutional discrimination. But what Stone was beginning to understand was that his name would be forever linked to federal accountability reforms that would protect millions of Americans from discriminatory law enforcement. Through the bank's windows, Channel 7's reporter Jessica Park adjusted her microphone for the live shot that would make this local incident national news. Behind her, 3 other news crews prepared equipment that would broadcast Stone's downfall across multiple networks, but also his potential contribution to civil rights protection. 30 seconds, Dr. Williams announced, as if directing a corporate presentation rather than a federal arrest. Her calm authority had never wavered throughout the confrontation, suggesting someone accustomed to high-pressure situations with career-ending implications. What Dr. Williams had orchestrated was something more significant than individual accountability. She had created a teachable moment that would reshape federal law enforcement culture. Zoe's live stream peaked at 9,800 viewers as anticipation built toward the climactic moment. Comments flooded with predictions, reactions, and demands for justice that reflected public hunger for federal accountability. But what the viewers were about to witness was not just destruction, but the beginning of systematic reform that would protect civil rights for generations. Agent Stone signed the document with a pen that felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. Each letter of his name represented another piece of his federal career being surrendered to save himself from maximum prosecution. What Stone was accepting was transformation from law enforcement officer to civil rights educator, a role that would give meaning to his disgrace. Agent Martinez, Dr. Williams said, turning toward the supervisor whose negligence had enabled years of discrimination, "Your administrative review begins immediately. FBI headquarters expects your complete personnel files within 24 hours. Martinez nodded mutely, understanding that his 15 years of federal service were being reduced to a case study in supervisory failure. But what Martinez was also learning was that cooperation with reforms could salvage something from his ruined career. His reputation, his pension, his future employment prospects, everything was under investigation, but full cooperation could minimize the damage. The bank's front door chimed as news crews entered, their cameras capturing the moment federal accountability played out in real time. Reporter Jessica Park approached with the confidence of someone recognizing a career-defining story. What Jessica was documenting was not just individual failure, but systematic change that would influence federal law enforcement for decades. This is Jessica Park, Channel 7 News, coming to you live from First National Bank, where an FBI agent has just been arrested for civil rights violations. She announced to cameras that would broadcast the story across the region. But Dr. Williams had orchestrated something more significant than individual accountability. Stone's cooperation agreement would expose a network of discriminatory behavior, reaching far beyond one field office. What the broadcast would reveal was that Stone's case was part of a comprehensive federal investigation that would trigger reforms protecting millions of Americans. Stone's cooperation would expose systematic training failures, supervisory negligence, and institutional cultures that enabled discrimination across multiple federal agencies. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Williams addressed the assembled crowd with the authority of someone announcing policy changes that would affect millions of citizens. What you've witnessed today represents the intersection of individual accountability and institutional reform. The cameras rolled as she spoke, her words being broadcast live across multiple networks to audiences who were hungry for federal accountability. But what Dr. Williams was announcing was that Stone's disgrace would become the foundation for the most comprehensive law enforcement reforms since the Civil Rights Act. Stone stood beside her, signed cooperation agreement in hand, looking like a man who'd aged 10 years in 30 minutes. What Stone was beginning to understand was that his humiliation would serve a greater purpose in protecting future victims of discrimination. Agent Stone's discriminatory behavior represents a pattern we've documented across 17 federal field offices. His cooperation will help us implement reforms preventing future civil rights violations by law enforcement officers. 17 field offices. The scope of investigation was staggering. Stone's misconduct was part of a systematic problem requiring congressional intervention and complete restructuring of federal training protocols. What the audience was learning was that Stone's case would trigger the biggest federal accountability initiative in decades. The FBI takes civil rights violations seriously, Dr. Williams continued, her voice carrying to the back of the lobby where bank employees watched in stunned silence. Today's incident demonstrates our commitment to holding our own agents accountable to the same constitutional standards we enforce for others. What Dr. Williams was establishing was that federal law enforcement would police itself with the same vigor it applied to civilian criminals. Agent Martinez stepped forward reluctantly, understanding that his supervisory failures needed acknowledgement. On behalf of this field office, I apologize for Agent Stone's conduct and commit to implementing whatever reforms headquarters requires. The apology felt hollow after 18 months of ignored complaints and dismissed violations, but it represented the beginning of institutional change that would transform federal law enforcement culture. What Martinez was accepting was that systematic change required admitting systematic failures. Zoe's live stream reached its peak at 10,000 viewers as the confrontation concluded with federal accountability rather than the cover-up many expected. Her footage would be preserved as evidence of how individual courage could expose systematic injustice and create lasting change. What Zoe had documented was proof that ordinary citizens could hold federal authority accountable when they had the courage to record truth. Agent Stone will face federal prosecution under Title 18 U.S.C. Section 242, Dr. Williams announced. His sentencing will include community service with civil rights organizations, ensuring that his experience educates future law enforcement officers about constitutional protections. Williams was creating a path for Stone to transform his discrimination into education that would protect future victims. Community service with civil rights organizations meant Stone would spend years working directly with the communities he'd discriminated against, learning empathy through service rather than simply facing punishment through imprisonment. Patricia Chen emerged from behind the bulletproof glass, her 15 years of banking experience having witnessed something unprecedented. Dr. Williams, will this affect other agents who've shown similar behavior? What Patricia was asking reflected public hunger for systematic accountability that would address discrimination beyond individual cases. The investigation continues, Dr. Williams replied diplomatically. Every complaint, every incident, every pattern of discriminatory behavior will be reviewed and addressed through appropriate federal channels. The promise of continued investigation sent ripples through law enforcement communities across the region. What Dr. Williams was establishing was that officers who'd engaged in racial profiling understood that their conduct was now under systematic federal scrutiny. Officers across the federal system would modify their behavior knowing that discrimination faced serious consequences. Reporter Jessica Park posed the question viewers were asking nationwide. Dr. Williams, how long has this investigation been underway, and how many agents might face similar consequences? 18 months of comprehensive documentation, Dr. Williams replied. The number of agents facing consequences depends on their choices. Those who cooperate with reforms will face administrative discipline. Those who resist accountability will face maximum federal prosecution. What Dr. Williams was offering was a carrot and stick approach that offered redemption for officers willing to acknowledge problems while promising severe consequences for those who continued discriminatory behavior. 6 months later, the transformation was visible throughout the FBI's regional headquarters, where Agent Stone once worked with impunity. A diverse team of investigators now operated under reformed protocols that prioritized civil rights protection alongside criminal investigation. What the transformation demonstrated was that systematic change was possible when individual accountability met institutional commitment to reform. Stone himself had been sentenced to 2 years probation, 500 hours of community service, and permanent prohibition from federal law enforcement. But what Stone had discovered was that his cooperation had helped convict 3 other agents and implement training programs that reached 47 field offices nationwide. His disgrace had been transformed into educational value that protected thousands of Americans from discriminatory law enforcement. The Rodriguez Excellence Center, established with federal funding and named after Angel Rodriguez, whose complaint had triggered the investigation, provided civil rights training for law enforcement officers across 6 states. What the center represented was proof that individual courage in filing complaints could trigger systematic reforms that protected entire communities. The irony wasn't lost on anyone that Stone now worked there as a community service coordinator, teaching other officers about the constitutional violations that had destroyed his own career. Agent Martinez had been demoted to field agent and transferred to a desk position reviewing civil rights complaints. His supervisory failures had been documented in federal training materials as an example of how institutional blindness enabled discrimination. What Martinez had become was a case study in how supervisory negligence could be as destructive as individual misconduct. Williams received the Federal Law Enforcement Award for Excellence in Civil Rights Protection, but the real victory was measured in changed behavior across federal agencies. What the data showed was that complaint reports increased by 67% as officers understood that discrimination would face consequences, while verified violations decreased by 43% as training programs prevented problematic conduct. The congressional hearings had led to the Federal Law Enforcement Accountability Act, requiring body cameras for all federal agents, mandatory bias training every 6 months, and civilian oversight boards with subpoena power. What Stone's testimony had accomplished was passing legislation that would protect civil rights for generations of Americans. Stone's cooperation had been crucial in creating accountability measures that would prevent future officers from making his mistakes. Zoe Martinez, the teenager whose live stream had documented federal accountability in real time, received a journalism scholarship and now worked as a civil rights reporter for a major news network. What Zoe's courage demonstrated was that ordinary citizens could create extraordinary change when they had the courage to document injustice. Her footage remained required viewing in law enforcement academies across the nation, teaching future officers about the consequences of discriminatory behavior. Most importantly, the culture had changed. Federal agents understood that badges came with responsibilities, not privileges. What the transformation proved was that discrimination was no longer ignored or dismissed but faced swift investigation and appropriate consequences. The final victory belonged to citizens like Angel Rodriguez, whose courage in filing complaints had triggered reforms protecting millions of Americans from discriminatory law enforcement. What Rodriguez's story proved was that individual voices could challenge institutional power when supported by federal investigators committed to constitutional protection. Dr. Williams continued her work as special agent in charge, knowing that eternal vigilance was the price of constitutional freedom. The investigation that began with one young man's complaint had transformed federal law enforcement culture, proving that systematic change was possible when individual courage met institutional accountability. What the entire case demonstrated was that real change happened when people chose dignity over prejudice, accountability over cover-ups, and justice over institutional loyalty. These are the real stories that matter. Stories of federal agents who chose justice over prejudice, of investigators who held colleagues accountable, of citizens who refused to accept discrimination as normal. Stories that prove our constitutional rights are only as strong as our commitment to protecting them for everyone, regardless of race, background, or circumstances. Have you witnessed discrimination by law enforcement? Have you filed complaints that were ignored? Have you seen the courage it takes to challenge federal authority when it exceeds constitutional bounds? Share your experiences in the comments below. Your voice matters in this fight for federal accountability. Subscribe to Federal Secrets for more stories of how federal power protects justice when individual courage meets institutional reform. Hit that like button if Dr. Williams's investigation inspired you, and share this story with someone who needs to know that constitutional rights apply to everyone, regardless of their position or authority. Together we can ensure that federal law enforcement serves and protects all citizens with the dignity and respect our Constitution demands.